A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corn. So the day that we were waiting for weeks here in the Middle East, talking about whether Iran and Israel would go to war, occurred yesterday. The Israel and the US launching a joint operation, trying to eliminate the imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, which, by all accounts, including that of the IAEA, was already enriching uranium at a very high level and seemingly intent on enriching it to weapons grade very, very quickly. We talked about how that breakout period was actually potentially very, very short indeed. So Israel and the US began strikes yesterday. They're ongoing. We spent most of the last 24 hours plus in Israel in shelter. I'm currently recording this again from the underground car park, within a car this time. Maybe the acoustics are a little bit better. But it's a designated safe shelter in my neighborhood. So that is where we are, and we're hearing booms overhead, and the sirens are going on and off throughout the day, the air raid sirens. Yesterday, the most significant event was that the leader of the Iranian regime, Ali Khamenei, was officially eliminated. Iranian state media confirmed at about 3 a.m. local time that Khamenei had been killed. Reports surfaced about 6 or 7 hours previously with Trump announcing it and President Netanyahu, Israeli sources saying that they were growing increasingly confident over the course of the day that Khamenei had indeed been eliminated. So that is official news, and it's a huge, huge shift in the Middle East. We talked in another episode about the the Islamic Revolutionary Guards itself, and what that organization actually looks like at the moment. But I'd love to chat today about the role of human intelligence in multi-source intelligence inputs, because what was interesting about yesterday's strike was that shortly after it, satellite imagery emerged of Khamenei's compound. And I follow a lot of the satellite imaging accounts on X, and the geo coordinates as well as the imaging was posted. It was Airbus imaging almost immediately after the announced strike, which we've talked in some previous episodes about the concept of real-time, almost like a real-time picture of a battleground that satellite imagery provides. And I think that actually provided an insight for me into what that capability actually means. If this is surfacing in open source accounts, then needless to say, the military has a much deeper and much better and probably higher resolution image of maybe every centimeter of Iranian territory, because we got essentially real-time imaging from just an overpass of a commercial satellite, not a military satellite. So we've talked about that aspect. We've talked about signals intelligence, but we haven't talked about how human intelligence would be fused and relayed. And I mention all this background context about Khamenei because it was speculated, and again, we'll probably never get the truth of exactly what happened. Iran and Israel have been trying to pin down Khamenei for some time, and the speculation or the commentary or the analysis was that every single possible measure would have been taken to make the existence of this meeting secret. No digital footprint whatsoever. And one of the accounts on X said it must have been someone in the room. Let's imagine that it was someone in the room. There was an asset, there was a leak, there was a mole, whatever the case may have been. That message, some kind of a signal, still needs to get back to Israel. And this is where I'd love to get into the concept of how human intelligence can be integrated in real time or near real time into a multi-input control situation, like what we have at the moment, where we have a joint Israeli-US operation, right? You've got satellite intelligence, you've got bundles of different inputs, and you might have sources that are providing information on a regular basis and being debriefed and making it into the system that way. But if time's of the essence, there needs to be a way to patch in real-time human intelligence from sources, spies, assets into the system, and how that might actually happen. Every time I go on to X, in addition to all this stuff, I also see the number station people sometimes reporting bursts of Morse code that they intercepted on shortwave frequencies. Is that a viable communication method that they actually might use? Because what I think is really interesting when we think about how can human sources communicate covertly with states today is that, well, there's every technology theoretically available. We don't need invisible ink anymore. There's USB. You can store anything the size on your fingernail, terabytes of data, satellites, Bluetooth, you name it. But what actually might be the more credible methods used in order to fuse this data into these multi-input intelligence systems that are part of decision making in operations like this? Herman and Corn, I know that's a very hard question to answer, but let's try to get some insight from what we know about these matters in other parts of the world.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Corn, and I have to say, my heart is a little heavy today starting this one. We just heard that audio from Daniel. And while we are used to him sending us these fascinating deep dives, hearing that he is recording from an underground car park in Jerusalem while air raid sirens are going off, it really brings the reality of what we are discussing home. It is March 1st, 2026, and the world feels like it is tilting on its axis.
It really does. Herman Poppleberry here, and Daniel, if you are listening to this later, we are thinking of you, Hannah and little Ezra. It is one thing to read about these geopolitical shifts in a research paper or a news ticker, but it is another thing entirely when your friend is in a shelter hearing the booms overhead. The news of the strike on the Iranian regime and the elimination of Ali Khamenei is, well, it is a hinge point in history. There is no other way to put it. We are witnessing the culmination of years of escalating tensions, and the technical precision of this operation is something that will be studied in military academies for the next 50 years.
It is massive, and Daniel's prompt today is so sharp, especially given the circumstances. He is looking past the headlines of the explosions and the satellite photos and asking the how of the intelligence, specifically the human element. We have spent so much time on this show talking about the eye in the sky, the signals, the cyber warfare, but Daniel wants to know about the person in the room, the spy, the asset, the human source. How do they get their information out in real time when the stakes are literally change the world high?
It is the ultimate technical challenge. Think about it. You are an asset inside a high-security compound in Tehran. The regime knows they are being watched by every satellite the United States and Israel have. They have probably jammed local signals. They are monitoring every bit of data leaving the building, and yet, somehow, the confirmation comes through that the target is in the crosshairs. Daniel mentioned seeing those Airbus satellite images almost immediately after the strike, but those images show the what. The human source provides the who and the now.
Right, because a satellite can tell you a convoy has arrived, but it can't always tell you for certain who stepped out of the third car, especially if they are using decoys or moving through tunnels. We actually touched on some of that orbital deception back in episode 567, the one about the orbital shell game. But if you have a human on the ground, that is your ground truth. So, Herman, let's start with the how. In 2026, with all the surveillance we have, how does a human source communicate covertly without getting a knock on the door 5 minutes later?
That is the million-dollar question, or in this case, the multi-billion-dollar intelligence question. The traditional methods, the stuff of Cold War novels, they still exist, but they have been digitized and accelerated. You have to think about low probability of intercept and low probability of detection, communications. If I am an asset, I am not pulling out a satellite phone with a big antenna. I am using something that blends into the background radiation of the city. We call this spectral camouflage.
Spectral camouflage? That sounds like something out of a stealth fighter briefing. Are we talking about mesh networks? Or something even more stealthy?
Mesh networks are a big part of it. If you can hop a signal across a series of low-power nodes, like modified civilian hardware, it is very hard to trace back to a single source. But for real-time integration into a joint operation like the one Daniel described, you need something that hits the system fast. One of the most credible methods today is what we call cloud-based covert channels. Instead of sending a direct message, an asset might upload a seemingly mundane file to a public server, like a photo of a cat or a piece of open source code on a site like GitHub. But hidden within the metadata or the pixels themselves, using advanced steganography, is the intelligence.
Wait, so the system is just constantly scraping public websites for specific triggers from its assets?
And in 2026, with the AI tools we have, that scraping happens in milliseconds. An asset could post a confirmation to a prearranged, innocuous-looking account, and the military's all-source fusion engine picks it up, decrypts the hidden layer, and correlates it with the satellite feed. It is hiding in plain sight. But there is also the hardware side. We have talked about the nervous system of war in episode 767, and that nervous system now includes ultra-wideband burst transmissions.
Burst transmissions? That is where you take a whole message and compress it into a tiny fraction of a second, right?
Precisely. You send the data in a burst so short that a standard radio scanner might just register it as a flicker of static or background noise. If you are using frequency hopping spread spectrum technology, you are jumping across thousands of frequencies every second. For a human source, this might be a device no larger than a button on their jacket. They press it, and a tiny encrypted packet of data is sent up to a low Earth orbit satellite. Because it is so fast and so low power, it is incredibly difficult for the regime's counterintelligence to triangulate.
That is fascinating. But let's dig into the real-time aspect. If I'm a general in a command center, I'm not just looking for a yes or no. I need to know the target is there right now. How does that human message get fused with the other inputs? Daniel's question touches on the fusion aspect. It is not just about getting the message out. It is about how that message becomes part of the decision-making process for a strike. If a human source says he's in the room, how does a general in a command center thousands of miles away know to trust that piece of data over, say, a conflicting signal from a drone?
That is where multi-source intelligence fusion gets really nerdy and really impressive. In modern joint operations, we use something called weighted Bayesian correlation. Every source of information has a confidence score attached to it. Satellites might have a high confidence for location, but a lower confidence for identity. Signals intelligence might have a high confidence for voice recognition, but a lower confidence for physical presence if there is a recording being played.
And the human source?
The human source is often the tiebreaker. If the human asset has a proven track record, their input weights the other data. If the AI sees a heat signature in a bunker that matches a human shape, and the signal's intelligence picks up a specific encrypted phone being activated in that vicinity, and then the human source sends a burst transmission saying, "Target confirmed," the system sees those three independent lines of effort converging. When they overlap, the confidence score hits 99%, and that is when the go order is given.
It is like a digital jury, but the human is the one who can provide the context. I remember we discussed the cost of a click in episode 779 about operational security. For an asset, the click of sending that confirmation is the most dangerous thing they will ever do. So, the system has to be designed to protect them too. It is not just about the strike, it is about the extraction or the keep alive of that source.
Right? And that brings up another method Daniel asked about, passive signaling. Sometimes the best way to communicate isn't to send a signal at all, but to change something in the environment that a satellite can see. This is the high-tech version of putting a flower pot on a balcony. Maybe the asset leaves a specific door open or parks a vehicle in a certain orientation. To a casual observer, it is nothing. To a high-resolution synthetic aperture radar satellite, it is a binary yes.
That is incredible, because it requires zero electronic signature. You can't jam a parked car.
And that is why these joint operations are so complex. You have the technical intelligence, or techant, the signals intelligence, or sigint, and the human intelligence, or humant, all dancing together. In the case of the strike on the Iranian regime, the speculation is that there must have been someone very close to the inner circle. To bypass the layers of security Kamine had, you need real-time confirmation that he hasn't moved through a tunnel in the last 5 minutes.
You know, it makes me think about the digital handshake we discussed in episode 884, specifically about the US and Israel's hybrid missile defense. That same level of technical handshaking has to happen between the intelligence agencies. If a Mossad asset provides the human, but a US Air Force drone is providing the strike capability, the data has to flow through a unified command and control system. It can't be a phone call between agencies. It has to be a shared data layer.
And that is exactly what Operation Roaring Lion showed us, which we covered in episode 890. The mechanics of that operation relied on a shared, real-time intelligence cloud. When Daniel asks about the most credible methods, I think the answer is hyperlocal edge processing. We are seeing assets equipped with wearable tech that doesn't even need them to send a message. It might just monitor their biometric response or their proximity to a certain beacon, and that data is pulled by the system rather than pushed by the asset.
Wait, so the spy doesn't even have to decide to send the message? That sounds a bit like science fiction, Herman. Are we talking about implants?
Not necessarily implants, though in 2026 the line is blurring, but think about a smart fabric or a piece of jewelry that act as a passive sensor. If the asset walks into a room with a specific electromagnetic signature, the device registers it and waits for a ping from a passing stealth drone or a low-orbit satellite. It is like a high-stakes version of an AirTag, but encrypted with quantum-resistant algorithms. The asset just has to be there. It reduces the cognitive load on the spy and makes them less likely to give themselves away through nervous behavior.
That is a huge point. The psychological pressure of being a human source in a place like Tehran right now must be unfathomable. If the system can take some of that burden off them by automating the reporting, it makes the intelligence more reliable. But I want to go back to the real-time aspect. Daniel mentioned that the satellite images appeared almost immediately. That suggests a level of cross-queuing. That is just mind-blowing.
Cross-queuing is the secret sauce. It is when one sensor tells another sensor where to look. So, the human source provides the indicator and warning. They say, something is happening at the compound. That signal automatically cues the satellite to change its tasking and focus on those coordinates. Then, the satellite sees a specific vehicle, which cues a signals intelligence platform to listen for frequencies associated with that vehicle's security detail. It is a cascading effect. By the time the decision maker looks at the screen, they aren't looking at raw data. They are looking at a fused picture where the human's input has been verified by 3 other technical means.
It is like the ultimate fact-checking machine. But there is a darker side to this, isn't there? If the regime knows this is how it works, they can use human deception to feed the system false data. They could turn an asset or create a fake asset to lead the intelligence into a trap. How does the system account for the double agent problem in real time?
That is the counter-human challenge. And the way we solve it now is through anomaly detection. If a human source provides information that is perfectly aligned with what the satellites see, but the signal's intelligence shows a strange pattern of communication from the regime's own internal security, the AI flags it. It looks for too perfect alignment. Often, real intelligence is messy. If it is too clean, the system suspects a setup. We actually saw some of those deception tactics in the Orbital Shell game episode. It is a constant chess match.
It really is. And Daniel, thinking about you sitting in that car park, it makes me realize that while we are talking about the cool tech and the fusion engines, the reason this information is being relayed is to protect people, or to stop threats like the one you are facing right now. The human in human intelligence isn't just the spy, it is the person on the other end of the missile, and the person in the shelter.
Well said, Korn, and I think that is why the integration Daniel asked about is so vital. In the past, human intelligence was slow. It took days or weeks to verify. In a conflict involving potential nuclear enrichment, as Daniel mentioned with the International Atomic Energy Agency reports, you don't have days, you have seconds. The integration of human into the digital handshake is what allows for surgical strikes. It is the difference between hitting a city block and hitting a specific room in a specific bunker.
Let's talk about the communication covertly part a bit more. Daniel asked how they get it back to the system. We talked about burst transmissions and steganography. But what about ambient data? I was reading about how some intelligence agencies are using Internet of Things devices that are already in the target environment. If a spy can influence a smart thermostat or a security camera that is already connected to the internet, they can send a signal without ever using their own hardware.
Oh, that is a very credible method today. It is called infrastructure exploitation. If I am an asset and I know that a certain server in the building is compromised, I can trigger a specific error log that looks like a routine technical glitch to the regime's IT department. But to an outside observer monitoring that server's public-facing traffic, that glitch is actually a coded message. Error 404 might mean target not present, while error 500 means target confirmed. It is brilliant because it uses the enemy's own infrastructure against them.
And since the system on our side is automated, it doesn't need a human to sit there and read error logs. The AI just sees the pattern and updates the mission dashboard. It is near real time in the truest sense. But Herman, doesn't this make the world a much more paranoid place? If anything can be a signal, a parked car, an error log, a cat photo, how does a regime like the one in Iran even begin to defend against that?
They can't really. That is the asymmetric nature of modern intelligence. They try to air gap their most sensitive systems, meaning they disconnect them from the internet entirely. But even then, you have things like acoustic side channels. If a human source has a smartphone in their pocket, even if it is off, the microphone can sometimes be used to pick up the high-frequency sounds of computer fans or processors. Those sounds can be analyzed to figure out what the computer is doing.
Okay, now you're definitely getting into the weird part of my weird prompts. But it makes sense. If you have a human in the room, they are a walking sensor platform. They don't even need to do anything. Their presence is the exploit.
And to Daniel's point about decision-making, this is where it all culminates. The Joint Operations Center isn't just looking at a map, they are looking at a probability surface. It is a three-dimensional visualization where the peaks are the areas of highest intelligence certainty. When the human source plugs in, that probability peak gets sharper and taller. It gives the commanders the confidence to act in a high-stakes, low-time environment.
It is a far cry from the secret bunkers and glowing maps of old movies, like we talked about in the nervous system of war. Today, the map is a living, breathing data model that is being fed by thousands of inputs, including the whispered confirmation of a single person in a dangerous room.
And that person is the bravest part of the whole system. You can replace a satellite, you can't replace a human source who has spent years building the trust required to be in that room. The real-time relay is as much about protecting that person as it is about hitting the target. If the strike is successful, the system often triggers a pre-planned escape and evasion protocol for the asset, sometimes using the chaos of the strike itself as cover.
It is a multi-angle topic for sure. We have the technical side, the steganography, the burst transmissions, the Bayesian logic, and we have the human side, the bravery, the risk, and the ground truth reality. Daniel, I hope this deep dive provides some distraction, or at least some context, for the world-shaking events you are witnessing from that car park.
Truly, it is a reminder that while the gears of war are often made of silicon and steel, they are still turned by human hands. Whether it is the prompter sending us these questions, the asset in Tehran, or the families in Jerusalem, the human is still the most important part of the intelligence.
You know, Herman, thinking about the most credible methods for decision-making today, I think we have to mention automated deconfliction. When you have so many sources, satellites, drones, humans, signals, you inevitably get noise. One of the biggest advancements in 2026 is the ability for the system to ask the human source for clarification.
Oh, the interactive loop. That is a great point, Korn. It is no longer a one-way street. The command center can send a query back to the asset. It might be a subtle vibration on a wearable device. One pulse for, is he alone? Two pulses for, is he with civilians? The asset can respond with a simple, tactile gesture. This micro-interaction allows the system to refine its understanding without the asset ever having to speak or even look at a screen.
That tactile communication is so much safer than a text message or a radio call. It is literally haptic intelligence. It is the ultimate real-time integration. and it explains how these joint operations can be so precise. They aren't just acting on old information, they are having a silent conversation with the person on the ground right up until the moment of impact.
It is the pinnacle of human-machine teaming. And in a situation as volatile as the Middle East right now, that precision is what prevents a regional conflict from turning into a global catastrophe. By being able to confirm a high-value target with absolute certainty, you avoid the collateral damage that often leads to further escalation.
We should also talk about the temporal aspect of this. In 2026, we are dealing with hyperwar. The time between an intelligence trigger and a kinetic action has shrunk from hours to minutes, or even seconds. If a human source provides a tip, the system has to be able to verify it across the entire kill chain almost instantly. This is where the all-source fusion engine really earns its keep. It is processing petabytes of data from the orbital shell game, satellites, the nervous system of war sensors, and the human on the ground, all at once.
And it is doing it with post-quantum cryptography. We cannot forget that. The Iranian regime and other adversaries are trying to use quantum computers to break our codes. So, the human assets communication methods have to be quantum resistant. This means the math used to hide that cat photo or compress that burst transmission is so complex that even a quantum computer would take decades to crack it. It is a constant arms race between the lock makers and the lock breakers.
It makes you realize that the spy of 2026 is as much a data scientist as they are a field agent. They have to understand the digital terrain as well as the physical one. They are navigating through Wi-Fi dead zones and surveillance corridors just to find the right spot to send a single bit of data.
And that brings us back to Daniel's question about integration. The most credible method today is Unified Command and Control, or UC2. It is a single interface where all these inputs, HUMINT, SIGINT, GOINT, are layered on top of each other. The commander doesn't see a list of reports, they see a living map. If the human source moves, the map updates. If the satellite sees a cloud, the system automatically switches to radar. It is a seamless, auto-adaptive environment.
It is a far cry from the days of paper maps and radiostatic. But, as we always say, the tech is only as good as the people using it. And the people on the ground, like the ones Daniel is worried about, are the ones who feel the impact of these decisions.
Well said. And Daniel, we are so grateful for this prompt. It is a heavy day, but exploring these mechanisms helps us understand the why behind the what. We are sending all our best to you, Hannah and Ezra. Stay safe down there in that car park. We hope the sirens stop soon.
And to our listeners, if you are finding these deep dives valuable, especially in times like these when the news is moving faster than most of us can keep up with, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It helps the show reach more people who are looking for this kind of under-the-hood analysis of the world's most complex systems.
It really does. And remember, you can find all our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today, like Operation Roaring Lion and the Nervous System of War, over at myweirdprompts.com. We have a full archive there and a contact form if you want to send us your own weird prompts. We are always looking for new angles on how technology and humanity intersect.
You can also reach us directly at showmyweirdprompts.com. We love hearing from you, even if you aren't recording from an underground shelter. Though, Daniel, you definitely win the Most Intense Recording Location award for this year. We will be checking our inbox for your follow-up when you are safe.
No doubt about that. Herman Poppleberry, signing off for now. We will be watching the news closely, and we will be back with more human-AI collaboration very soon. The world is changing fast, and we are here to help you make sense of it.
Thanks for listening to my weird prompts. Our music, as always, is generated by Suno. We will talk to you in the next one. Stay safe, everyone.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts.